Hi, hello, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Emma Tomei, and I'm part of the team working to develop zero-emission appliance standards at the California Air Resources Board. This is an information session for our public expert solicitation. Okay, so now that everyone's made their English or Spanish language selection, here's the rest of tonight's agenda. First, I'll explain why and how we're recruiting public experts to be involved in staff analysis, engagement, and implementation planning work, and who's eligible for the limited funding that we have available. My colleague Maggie will then walk through the application questions and form. Then we'll hold some space for questions you may have to support you as you consider applying. So please share your questions via the Zoom Q&A feature throughout. You should be able to see this with the two little chat bubble icons at the bottom of your Zoom window. And we'll first address written questions and then a chunk of verbal questions. And we'll alternate between written and verbal questions during the 30 minutes we have allocated to address any questions you might have. So please also note that tonight's program is focused on our engagement process and this public expert solicitation. We won't discuss or answer detailed questions about the zero-emission appliance standards themselves, but this will be covered in future meetings. And if you have any additional questions or aren't able to access the Q&A feature, you can send us an email at buildingdecarb@arb.ca.gov, and we have someone who's monitoring that email address during tonight's program. So to provide some context for this moment in our engagement work, I'll explain the overall arc of this process and how we got to tonight. So after our kickoff workshop in May, staff from the Sacramento State Consensus and Collaboration Program interviewed over 50 different potentially impacted people, organizations, and businesses. They finished an assessment report in late October with lots of details about interviewees' wishes for the standards development process and recommendations for CARB staff for topics to address in our analysis and engagement work. And this report formed the foundation of an engagement strategy and plan that CARB staff developed and that we shared in an announcement last Wednesday morning. In that report, we talk about things like modes of engagement, interagency coordination, and this public expert solicitation. And this solicitation will help us recruit experts to participate in a series of focused meetings and co-host community events next year while we're in the heart of our engagement work. A subset of these public experts will be able to be funded. And this engagement work will happen alongside the larger public workshops that some of you might be familiar with. And finally, evaluation is a critical part of understanding whether these approaches are working. So at checkpoints throughout and at the close of this effort, SAC State will collect feedback on and evaluate our process so we can continually improve. So the two documents I just mentioned and more information about the engagement plan are available at our website. Before moving on, I just want to check in with folks who are here. At our first workshop, we were excited to learn that over a quarter of attendees were participating in a CARB workshop for the first time. This time, we'd like to learn a little bit about your past participation in public engagement opportunities. So you should now see a poll open on your screen. We're just curious to learn of the folks who have joined this evening if you've made a verbal or written public comment to CARB before. So the options are no, 1 to 3 times, 4 to 7 times, or more than 7 times. And I'll leave this open for a couple more seconds until the answers slow down. Again, it's exciting to see today that, the largest answers here are folks who haven't made a verbal or written public comment to CARB before, who are relatively new to our formal public engagement processes. So it's really exciting to have you here. And we're just honored to be able to share this information with you, regardless of how familiar you might already be with commenting and participating in work with CARB. And we hope that tonight you can get the information that you need. So what's different about this public expert process than the other engagement opportunities some of you might be familiar with? As many of you know, before any regulation is considered by the board, the work that CARB staff do lives mostly on the page, in the analysis and proposals that you'll see coming out this year and next as we prepare to make recommendations to the board in 2025. But what any potential regulation is aimed toward is, of course, things that happen in the real world that impact the quality of the air we breathe and the future of our shared climate. In CARB Zero-Emission Appliance Standards work, we're analyzing and considering proposals to regulate climate change causing emissions from everyday things like space and water heaters in our homes and businesses. Things that are so commonplace and usually work so well that we often barely notice them. But this privilege of not noticing is not universal to all parts of the world or even all parts of this state. People living in different regions or even in different homes on the same block can have extraordinarily different experiences of and access to these amenities. So the range of these lived experiences can be challenging to see from where CARB staff are sitting, even with the wonderful research happening in this space. This is why we want to go beyond the public engagement work that's required of us to build a more robust understanding of the conditions and needs across the state, and so we can propose a more successful regulation. So with the solicitation, we're inviting public experts to get involved in this critical work. And we use the term public expert in a broader sense than the word expert might mean to you. For us, experts go beyond having academic training or technical knowledge. Expertise is also based in one's lived experiences, community relationships, and understanding of the ways many kinds of workers and people are currently doing building decarbonization work and would need to collaborate to implement any potential regulation. So this is why we're prioritizing public experts who have hands-on experience and for whom that experience is in the state's low-income and socioeconomically and environmentally disadvantaged communities. So public experts will be integrated throughout the rule development process, and for some, continue on into implementation planning. There are 3 staggered but overlapping public expert tracks. First, staff analysis and engagement support. Second, co-hosting listening sessions, and third, implementation planning support. So since there are many similarities in the format for track 1 and track 3 activities, I'll first explain these together. Track 1 will start as soon as we can get public experts onboarded via subcontracts with Sacramento State. And depending on their expertise, track 1 public experts will review staff methods related to topics such as technology options and costs, affordability, building readiness, and equity. Additionally, they'll be asked for feedback on the engagement process. Track 1 and 3 experts may both do work related to priority topics, and I'll share more on this next. The difference with track 3 is largely timing. We'll engage folks on implementation planning starting mid-year next year as soon as we're able to execute service contracts with CARB. And these conversations will focus more on practical considerations and things that'll fall outside of this initial staff analysis work. So as I noted on the previous slide, folks with expertise in the priority topics named here are especially encouraged to apply. These are building readiness for the installation of zero-emission appliances, including complex and large-scale systems, labor and workforce development needs, market and technology readiness and costs, tenant protections and affordable housing programs and policy, wood burning, propane-fueled end uses, and rural needs. And applicants will also have an opportunity to indicate an additional topic they see as pertinent that's not included in this list. So these topics are areas that were highlighted in the assessment process where CARB staff are seeking additional support, thinking through analysis and implementation approaches. And in the application, we'll ask prospective public experts to propose a specific presentation or paper wherein they could share their knowledge with CARB staff. So track 2 is distinct from 1 and 3 in a couple ways. We're asking folks to support with an in-person or hybrid local event to help get the word out about a staff proposal and to hear from different communities about this proposal. Track 2 experts hold extremely valuable expertise in their local connections and relationships and are willing to lend this to CARB staff to help us reach important and often underserved areas of the state. They're not required to have the same level of topical expertise in the areas I just shared, and they're welcome to propose additional activities like site visits or community tours. So as I mentioned, we do have some limited funding available to support public experts. To be eligible, an applicant must be part of a community-based organization or represent themselves as a low-income individual, or they can otherwise demonstrate their financial need. I'll note that our scoring will be based on general application responses, and you'll hear more on that from Maggie soon. And after applicants are ranked, we'll allocate available funding to those who are eligible based on their score to the general application responses. That is, we're not going to be evaluating based on their financial need, only considering whether they meet these eligibility criteria. Our funding is fairly limited. We have up to 18 tracks that will be funded at $5,000 each, or up to $5,000 each. And you may apply to more than one, but you'll be asked to rank your preferences because we expect to only be able to fund experts to participate in one. In rare cases, if someone scores highly for both track 2 and 3, we could potentially fund them to participate in both of those tracks. So thank you so much for your kind attention to that walkthrough. This slide includes a figure which summarizes everything I've shared so far. Before moving on, I'm curious to learn which of these tracks attendees today are most interested in applying to. So I'm going to share one more poll. You should now be able to see. Okay, I see our answers are slowing down. So this is exciting to see. We have a lot of pretty good spread actually in terms of the volume of public experts we're anticipating for these various areas of work, in that we'll have more folks engaged in the staff analysis and engagement support and track 3 implementation planning, and then a handful who will work with us on co-hosting listening sessions. So thank you so much for your engagement so far. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so our application form is now open and it will be until January 8th, 2024 at midnight. I'll turn things over to my colleague Maggie C., who will now walk through the application form and provide some guidance on how to answer the questions. I'll share the application guide and application form links in the chat now for you to follow along with if you wish.
Hi, thanks, Emma. So the application questions, scoring criteria, and eligibility requirements for funding are all available on the solicitation page under application guide here. This page is also available in Spanish, so if you click Español in the top right corner, it will translate into Spanish. So I'm going to run through all of these questions now, all of the application questions, by going through the form. But we recommend that you use this list of questions to prep any answers in a Word document so that you can copy and paste them directly into the form. That will make it easier for you to think about, edit, save any responses, and then fill out the form when you're ready. Just to recap, under public engagement, the application guide is here in this subheader. All of the questions are available here. The scoring criteria is also available on this page. And then to see this page in Spanish, you'll click Español in the top right. And now I'll move forward to the application form. So the form is made up of a couple different sections. There's general information, background and expertise, and then questions about each of the different tracks, and finally a funding section. This first section is general, so just first and last name, email, telephone number, etc. You'll need to fill out these basic forms before you can move on to the next section.
Hi, everyone. It seems that Maggie froze. But Maggie, you're back? Did I hear that right? Or was it somebody else speaking?
That was me, Melanie.
Oh,
Oh, I think Maggie might be.
all right.
Okay. Let's, I'll take over screen share shortly so we can continue sharing the application. So hang on just a second, folks. Appreciate your patience. Okay, are folks seeing my browser window?
Yes, and maybe you can also turn your screen back on. I mean, your video.
Okay. Great. So thank you for your patience. I think Maggie may have left off around here in an organization affiliation and priority communities description. So these fields are optional. You have an option to apply either as an individual or with an organization affiliation. If you have a website, either personal for your organization, you can include it here. We also ask to indicate whether you live or work in one of the following priority communities. So SB 535 disadvantaged communities, or the Callan virus green communities, as you might be familiar with, AB 1550 low income communities, and AB 617 communities who are part of the Community Air Protection Program are all considered priority communities for the purposes of this solicitation. We also ask you to select the region that best applies to where you live or work. You can choose more than one region. And if folks have questions about what we mean by these regions, we can answer in the Q&A. In general, these boundaries are loosely based on counties, but for areas like Greater Sacramento, the Bay Area, or Greater Los Angeles, it's a little bit porous as other counties might be included. Okay, so moving on. So we ask in your background and expertise for you to provide a description of your organization and role within the organization. This is 5 of 20 total points in this background and expertise section. And then question 10 asks you to relate this expertise to CARB's efforts to develop and implement potential zero-emission appliance standards. So here we're looking for direct examples of your experience working on building decarbonization, working with priority populations, experience with outreach or organizing work in areas related to air pollution, environmental justice, or other specific examples you find relevant. And this question is worth 15 of the total 20 points for this section. For these questions, we really encourage you just to answer with direct and concrete examples. We're scoring much more so for the content and relevance of your answers than how they're written, just as long as we're able to understand your responses. And don't feel that you need to meet these suggested word limits. Just write as much as you need to feel your answer is complete. Okay, so the next 3 sections of your specific are sort of the specific application questions for these 3 different tracks or types of engagement. So if you're interested in applying for track 1, staff analysis and engagement support, you'll just simply click yes here, and that'll expand the questions that are specific to track 1. So here, as I mentioned them before, are listed out the specific priority topic areas. So please check all that apply to you. You can check more than one than you wish, if you wish. And then in question 13, we ask you to elaborate on the topic that you've chosen to describe a potential presentation or briefing paper that you would share with CARB staff on this topic. Next, we'll ask you to select those areas of CARB staff methods that you'd be interested in reviewing. And both of these questions are worth 10 of 20 points for track 1. So this one will also be scored for relevance, especially if it's filling a knowledge gap that we have at CARB. And again, we're not expecting highly polished responses as much as you're demonstrating your unique expertise that's not already well reflected in our team's knowledge and access to research reports and other resources. Okay, so then for the methods review areas here, we just ask you to additionally to describe your experience and expertise related to those areas. Okay, so moving on to track 2, this is our co-hosting listening sessions track. So if you're interested in this track, you can click yes, or you can simply click no to move on to the next section. So here we ask you to provide a description of the type of event or listening session that you're interested in proposing. This is worth 20 points, and we ask that your answer include the goal, activity, target audience, location, and timing of the proposed event, and an approximate budget. So a bullet point list of these elements is just fine, and just be sure to clearly express the specific community you would wish to reach with this event. Larger events are not necessarily scored any higher. We're more so seeking a really clear expression of the communities you're a part of that you think CARB staff would benefit hearing from, and an event format that offers good opportunities for connection and learning. So track 3 is our implementation planning support track. If you're interested in applying to this track, we ask that you, like in track 1, select the priority topic areas that you possess expertise in. And you can speak to the additional topics here as well. Okay, so then our last question here for implementation planning work is just based on your expertise and current knowledge of our zero-emission appliance standards. We ask folks to describe at least one implementation consideration you believe that CARB staff should include in these implementation planning efforts and how it could be addressed.
Emma, I can jump back on. I'm
Oh,
here.
great.
Sorry.
No, wonderful. Glad to have you back, Maggie.
If you could keep sharing your screen, that would be great. And I can talk through the rest of it. There's only
Perfect.
one more section left. So that wraps up the track specific questions. All applications will be scored first without consideration of funding eligibility before any funding decisions are made. So this final section is optional. If you don't need funding support, you can click no and submit the form. But if you do want to apply for funding support, you'll click yes. And a few extra questions will populate. So question 22 asks if you have a tax ID number, which could be a social security number, an employer identification number, or the individual tax identification number. We also want to know if you are part of any existing CARB advisory committees. Unfortunately, members of existing CARB advisory committees are ineligible to receive funding, but they can still participate as public experts on a voluntary basis. We will then ask you to indicate how you are meeting the funding eligibility requirements. So either if you're affiliated with a CBO or if your income is under 80% of your county area median income. You can also write in another reason for financial support. We will not be evaluating your need for funding relative to any other applicant, only looking to see if you meet the criteria. But we will be prioritizing matching applicants who meet the eligibility criteria 1 or 2, so affiliated with a CBO or with income under 80%, before we move on to considering applicants who describe some other reason that they need funding support. The next question asks folks who have applied to multiple tracks to rank the tracks. So if you have applied to, say, track 2 and 3, but are more interested in co-hosting a listening session, you should drag that to the top. That way, if we have insufficient funding, we can try to make sure that you're able to match, we're able to match our funding allocations with the activities that you are most interested in. If you are willing to be contacted by CARB to discuss participation options, you'll click next. If you scroll down a little bit more, Emma, on question number 26, and then you'll click next. And then we have a field that if you have any feedback or questions for CARB, you can put them here, and then you can submit the form. And sorry for the back and forth, but now, Emma, I'll pass it back to you for the Q&A section.
Thank you so much, Maggie, for finishing that walkthrough. And thanks all here for your patience with us as we navigated that challenge. So I do see we've received a couple questions in the chat so far. And the first is a question from Julie Lindau, who is asking about the deadline for application. So Julie, the deadline is January 8th. To turn in the application form. We'll leave the form open until midnight on the 8th. Okay, now I also see a couple questions here from Laura Feinstein. Laura's asking around acceptable budget items to cover in a listening session budget. This is a really great question, and I'm afraid that I can't definitively answer these particular items now. Items like food and public transit fares to get to a site visit. I think it'd be helpful to talk through the specific items that you're interested in funding, and then we can make sure that we're consulting with the right folks on the contracting team at CARB to make sure folks understand eligible expenses for these kinds of events, and we'll update our FAQs with an answer to that question. So thanks, Laura, for asking, and I'm sorry that we're not able to provide a more definitive answer this evening. Okay, Laura's also asking about the priority populations map, which saying it shows 6 groups, but it doesn't tell the user which of these groups corresponds to being an SB 1550 or SB 535 community. And I just acknowledge that these designations can sometimes be quite confusing to work with. And so including the priority populations map citation might still not really make so apparent. So thanks for raising that issue to us, Laura. And I wonder if the best way to approach this question is just to go ahead and screen share the map that we have linked to and see if we can't arrive at a clearer answer for you. So it'll just take me a moment to get back to that part of the application where we have the link and also confirm that the link we've included here is the right one. So please keep your questions coming. That's the extent of the written questions we have in the Q&A right now. And then if you're interested in making a verbal question, please go ahead and raise your hand in Zoom so we know to call on you. I'm just going to check if we have any attendees over the phone. Okay, I'm not seeing any phone attendees. So yeah, if you're interested in asking a question out loud, please also raise your hand so we know. And while folks are thinking of their questions, I'm going to get the priority populations map up. Okay, so when you click the tiny URL in the priority populations link that's provided in the application form, it takes you to this GIS portal that the California Climate Investments team set up. And I really appreciate this question because I think it highlights the confusion that our phrasing might have caused. We use the Senate bill and Assembly bill names, but here they don't include those bill numbers and names, but rather the names of the designations themselves. So SB 535 would refer to these disadvantaged communities groups, and then low-income communities are the AB 1550. So we can clarify that. Certainly, I'll make sure that the form is updated so that the naming matches. In essence, if your home or work address falls inside any of these highlighted areas, you fall into one of the CARB priority populations. And then for the AB 617 communities, those communities are accessible via a separate link, and those are listed on the CARB website. So thanks again, Laura, for asking that. Please feel free to raise your hand and chime in more if you need any additional clarification. But thanks so much for pointing that out. I imagine that'll be helpful for other folks as well. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the Q&A and see if there's any more that have come in. Okay, so thank you, Julie. Okay, great. Yeah, we'll make the deadline more prominent on our website. Okay, so next I see a question from Leah Lewis Prescott. Leah's asking, will CARB be convening the public experts in track 1 and 3 in groups or meeting with each expert individually? Thanks, Leah. That's a great question. We're imagining convening public experts in groups. So folks who share similar areas of topical expertise will meet maybe in groups of 5 to 12, to dive deep into one of the specific topic areas that we've highlighted.
And I also see a question about being able to edit your application after it's been submitted. And do you know if that's an option or if people need to resubmit?
Unfortunately, I think that applications are not editable once they've been submitted via the form. So I think what would be probably easiest for CARB staff, well, I'll have to think through this a little bit more, but the answer off the top of my head now is to resubmit your application and give us a heads up that the second entry is the correct one, or reaching out to us and we can amend your answer after the fact. Yeah, to be honest, I'll need to think through this one a little bit more and ask the rest of the team who are reviewing applications. But unfortunately, you can't edit the form after you submit. So please make sure all your answers include the information you need to before you turn it in.
Someone had their hand up before I interrupted them, so I don't know if you wanted to raise your hand again. Was that Julia? I can't remember. But if there's no more questions, then
Okay, I do see one more. Yeah, okay, so we have a question. Does CARB have a limit on the funding, on the number of public experts that are not receiving funding? We have imagined kind of a ballpark of half funded, so 18 funded and about half non-funded public experts for, a range of 30 to 40. This is mostly our capacity to manage these smaller focused meetings. So that's roughly the number that we're imagining at this point. It could go up or down depending on the number of applications we receive. Okay, so I'm seeing there's no more questions coming in via the written Q&A, and I'm not seeing any hands raised now. So I'll just make one last call for folks to please raise their hand if they have a question they'd like to ask, and we'd be happy to speak with you now. Otherwise, we can answer questions over email, but I'd really encourage you to ask your question in the room now so other folks can benefit from hearing the things that you're curious about. So I'll do one last call for any verbal or written questions. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for taking time out of your evening to come and participate in this information session. This is a pilot effort for CARB to work on getting public experts more involved along the process for staff analysis, engagement, and implementation planning related to our zero-emission appliance standards work. So really encourage you all to consider applying, spread the word to folks in your networks and communities that you think might be good candidates. Reach out to us this winter if you have questions as you're working on your applications. And thank you so much again for taking the time this evening to learn about this effort. And we'll look forward to seeing your participation throughout the standards work to come. So thank you very much.